As a filmmaker, I was always interested in what I called to make credible films about incredible subjects. And when I read about the Sphinx and the pyramids, I was hooked.
As a young Orientalist and Egyptologist, I found myself in Egypt in the early 70s. I was interested in the possibility of validating an underground tunnel system that connected all pyramids with the Sphinx. It's very important to note that Ingo Swann had a scenario abstract of the complexities beneath Giza and the Sphinx as early as June 14, 1973. The research that was done by Lambert Dolphin and associates at A.R.E in 1976 did show the amazing underground connection of canals and passages, but that was not extensive enough at that time because Egyptian authorities did not want major technology to be brought in for purposes of excavation.
You can't go to Egypt without being moved. And when you stand in front of the pyramid and look up, it's just unbelievable. The height of a 40-story building, it takes your breath away.
You know, a lot has happened recently in the news about discoveries under the pyramids in Egypt. And it seems like a lot of the information coming out right now is going to be serving as feedback for remote viewing projects that Ingo Swann did himself in 1973 and 1978. And so let's talk about that. I'm here with Ellie Flippen, Ingo's niece, and we've got a lot of stuff to go through. So thank you for joining me, Ellie.
I am so honored to be here, Fabian, and so excited to talk about Ingo's work in Egypt, because that is something that I think rarely gets discussed in amongst all of his other things, but it was actually something near and dear to his heart, just not advocated that way.
I imagine a lot of people will be watching this video to see if they can cross-compare some of the things that Ingo said that he saw, some of the things he drew in his remote viewings. I would imagine people will want to cross-compare that with some of the information that came out last week.
These are notes written by Ingo Swann about his remote viewing session on site at the Great Pyramid in June of 1973. It's a letter to Peter Tompkins, and it's entitled Psychic Impressions of the Great Pyramid. Cheops was not and never has been a sepulcher, but a beacon of some kind, built around 20,000 years ago by ETs, but don't say I said so. Had severe claustrophobia inside of it. Strange, because I've been in deep mines and never felt that. There are at least 2 undiscovered chambers, one off the Queen's room and another above the King's chamber. Beneath the King's chamber, but blocked by about 10 to 15 feet of plugs, is a vertical descending shaft plunging into bedrock and then opening up into some chambers. Horizontal shafts seem to radiate west and south. The function of this pyramid seems to have something to do with sound, but I can't get a grip on it.
So he's saying there are lots of things that go down, and there's a complex below these tunnels. So even further, there's many of these things going down. Inside Cheops, there seem to be vertical shafts descending some 100 feet. These shafts apparently penetrate the water table, but above that are many exits into an amazing array of tunnel systems.
The rest of the document refers to how these tunnels or shafts were made. It doesn't appear that they were carved, they were fused or melted, like they had some technology to melt stone or something.
There is more below the ground of the Giza Plateau than above the ground. What we're seeing is simply the uppermost parts of the Sphinx and the pyramids, illustrating a much more complex underground network of buildings, of passageways, even of waterways that showed a hydraulic complex, very significant.
He has several different kind of his psychic impressions, which he is sort of drawing out and just kind of making hand notes to that support this. And in some of them, you can see there's the structure, and then you see a shaft going down into a subterranean. Again, something going down. And this is close to the Sphinx. But this is the main one. He's sort of saying, here's the king's chamber, and here are the shafts, and then down here, the subterranean. And this is very interesting because he's saying that he's wondering if this was left by ETs, which is very interesting. And it obviously pre-flood, so before 20,000 BCE. So he says, beneath the plaza are rooms and tunnels, most beneath the water table that may not have been there at the time. So the water table now may not have been the water table at the time. And most importantly, he's like, why all the shafts? Why are there so many shafts? So he must have met a Bedouin sheik of some sort and said, oh, they're just wells, some of them. And Ingo says, maybe, but not all. The rest must have been air shafts, but I get the impression that light rays came up out of some of them. What kind of light and why, I do not know. Okay, he's saying his best, this is interesting, my best overall guess impression is that the original use of this kind of complex had to do with arrivals, something like an airport, but not exactly. Then came the water, after which it was used by other people as some kind of processional shrine, and eventually as a burial ground. So again, he's kind of saying, here's some sort of down, and then there's some sort of subterranean structure underneath. And he's like tunnel to some past pyramid. So there's some sort of core that goes down to another core that he thinks there's something even below that. And I guess he's kind of showing what this shaft kind of down looks like into this room.
I'm always amazed when I pick up any book on the pyramids in Egypt and they talk about the Great Pyramid being a tomb. That's so retro. It's not right at all. We know the pyramid wasn't a tomb. The first guy to ever enter it, El Mamun, in 820 AD, broke in. No one had been there before him. They got all the way into the king's chamber. There was a tomb-like box, a sepulcher, sure, like a coffin, but there was no body in there. In fact, he had to fool his men because they were going to kill him. They wanted their wages. They were going to share the riches. So he buried a year's worth of gold in there and let them find it so that they didn't rebel. But there was never any treasure and there was never any body inside the Great Pyramid.
It's very important when we think of Egypt to realize Ingo Swann was one of the first to say that the Great Pyramid was not a sepulchre, not a tomb. Ingo's suggestion that the Great Pyramid is a beacon is all the more significant in the sense of what Russian scientists like Alexander Golod and others have done in Russia in creating artificial pyramids and actually measuring ionization levels of energy discharge out of the tops of pyramids. This shows that the pyramid is an energy collector as well as an energy transmitter. In short, the studies done by Ingo Swann set in motion a great excitement amongst a handful of Egyptologists who, unlike the Egyptians themselves who wanted to push back history only 3000 BC, could take a second look and say this was something that went back, as Ingo himself asserted, some 20,000 years. Plus, we were looking at a great footprint of human history on several levels, the top part of which was the Sphinx of Egypt. The bottom part was a vast system of passages, roads, rooms, and structures that illustrate what we find in other Egyptian texts, the realm of teaching, of the history of the human race, in conjunction with the imperishable stars and those who came from the imperishable stars to inspire these great monoliths of history, the seventh wonder of the ancient world.